So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there. We're on to our second half of our Q&A now, Niall, and we're going to start with one of the more serious questions before we sort of career into something a little bit more lighthearted. But a listener and a viewer has asked this question. Do we have any Gangland serial killers? And of course, they have put the FBI define serial killer as someone who kills two people in two separate events. I don't think it's quite as simple as that. I think they have to have a kind of a downtime between them. And I suppose when the FBI defines serial killer, they mean somebody who kills for pleasure as opposed to within Gangland usually.
Well, you see, this is, I mean, maybe the FBI define it that way, but there are people that have killed multiple people.
There is.
In Irish gangland history, and they are not regarded traditionally as being serial killers. But the question is really, if they hadn't been doing it for money and for gangs, would they have been the type that have done it anyway? Basically, are they serial killers that attach themselves to gangland?
I see it that, okay, look, in Gangland, and it is a very clear, things are quite more black and white than in that very weird sort of world of serial killers who don't really exist the same way as we think of them anymore because of lots of things. I suppose the sophistication of investigations that, you know, because of forensics, because of CCTV, because of GPS and stuff like that, people can't really float around the world unnoticed anymore.
No.
And hopefully and eventually, usually the police will catch up with them because they've left behind a digital fingerprint or, a piece of DNA or something like that. But in general, in Gangland, obviously, killing is a business.
Yeah.
And it has a value.
Yeah.
So there is a customer who is willing to pay an amount to have somebody killed, and there is somebody who's willing to, kill somebody for money.
Yeah.
So that's the black and white of it. But then you move into the sort of the grayer matter, and I think somebody like Robbie Lawler falls into that, and usually very chaotic, sinister individuals who, maybe take the role of hitman within Gangland because it suits them to kill or they get some sort of pleasure out of it. And the reason I picked Lawler is because he kills first when he's 20. He kills that time for no money. It's for revenge. And he does it in a very cool, calculated way. He shows absolutely no remorse. He kills a man who he's fought with in prison and who's released, and he does it in broad daylight, stands over the top of him to make sure that he's dead, puts one last bullet in him and walks away in rush hour traffic in Dublin. And that's the first time he kills, or he's known to. But he often almost, it doesn't have to be work to him.
No, but there is...
Need a motive could be anger with him or whatever.
Yeah, but I think there is mostly a motive for him, though. And a lot of it is, he's a type that it's a slight bit of disrespect or somebody looking down on him or, something like that. That will inspire him. And obviously the brutal and savage murder of Cian Mulready Woods falls into that category where that was almost a revenge for a group of young fellas sort of hitting him and taunting him. So I think a lot of his killings come back to, some of them they're very cold-blooded and all that, but...
what he sees as a personal slight.
Yes, exactly, or somebody maybe ratting on him or something like that. If you look at the case of David Lindsay and Alan Napper, now Eric Wilson has never been convicted of their murders, but he was the prime suspect, and they were killed in 2008. They were associates of George the Penguin Mitchell, significant drug dealers in their own right. And Eric Wilson is believed to have been hired by to kill them, basically, to take them out of. They were people owed them money and they wanted them dead, so he's believed to kill them somewhere in County Louth or County Down, I think. Ultimately, chopped up their bodies and dumped it into the sea or something like that, and that was all just for money.
Yeah,
and that's quite rare. A lot of the murders and even the people that have killed a few people, they will have been done as part of a gang, really, wouldn't they?
I mean, for sure. Look, by the turn of the new millennium, as cocaine started coming, as we're always talking about it, and it started really flooding into the country. You'd something happening on either side of the coastline of Ireland, the east and west coast, which sort of led to a killing boom.
Yeah.
And what that was two major feuds: one in Dublin, with the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud, and one in Limerick.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, within Gangland, instead of, I'm sure we could probably sort of through the 80s and 90s, we probably had a finite amount of assassins, aside from terrorism on this island, because always that, there is always has been, I suppose, a capability of bomb making and gun usage that is different to other parts of Europe because of the troubles in the north. But really, by the turn of the new millennium, those two feuds would create job opportunities for killers. And what you had then, I think, was people stepping up, coming in. You didn't have the sort of the traditional go-to assassin. You had people who started to train in it. Now, there was a guy in Limerick as well, I thought was particularly sinister.
Gary Campion.
Gary Campion.
Yeah, Gary Campion was again another hitman for hire, who, he was associated primarily with the McCarthy-Dundon gang, but he was a lone operator who did these things for money.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a very, very dangerous individual, and he was responsible for a number, like one of the most shocking killings, which was the killing of an innocent security guard,
Brian Fitzgerald in 2002.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Fitzgerald, I can't remember the exact motive, but it was very, very minor.
He was a 34-year-old father who'd refused to let the McCarthy-Dundon gang sell drugs in the nightclub where he worked as the head of security, and that was kind of the motive. That was enough.
Yeah, that was enough. And he took the payment and shot dead a total innocent man. I mean, not to say that anybody should be shot dead, but it takes something, very, very cold-hearted to just kill a citizen like that. He also carried out the murder of a guy called Fat Frankie Ryan in 2006. Somebody who I believe he kind of knew and didn't have particularly bad terms with, shot him in a car, if I remember correctly. So he's one of the few people to be, I think he's convicted of both of them murders, serving 2.
Well, I think it was 2006, was it not, that he would have got away with that Fitzgerald murder only for an English contract killer.
Yes, this is another guy,
James Cahill.
James Cahill,
who had been brought over as part of the kill team, and he basically found a sort of a conscience and started talking.
A very strange character, because he had suffered from a lot of mental ill health, let's put it that way. And, just a very bizarre kind of... Yeah, he did. He started to speak out.
He came from Birmingham, but he'd been brought up in County Clare, so he clearly had...
Yeah, and of course, the McCarthy-Dundons were a UK-Irish gang, because particularly at the time, they had a really strong base in places like Birmingham and in London, which allowed them to grow. Obviously the Dundon brothers had been brought up there. But James Martin Cahill was a strange guy, but he was one of the first. I mean, he didn't seem to look for much in return for giving evidence, but he...
There was some suggestion, though, that sort of road to Damascus moment for him, was it possibly that he was feared that he was going to be killed within the prison system, and I think his mental health was declining, but he thought that they were all going to kill him, and he looked for a transfer to a secure location. That's where he named Campion, who was still out and not nailed for anything until that point. He gave evidence, I think, in the Campion trial. And what happened to him? Do you remember?
Well, I think he was still in the prison system up until recently. I don't think we've written about him, but he was one of the few guys that were like Jonathan Dowdall, that were in this highly protective custody.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Gary Campion was a very, very dangerous person, and strange sort of unibrow. Do you remember the pictures of him?
Yeah,
Like,
he looked sinister. He came from a sort of a family that was entrenched in violence. His brother, William Jr., was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Patrick Skean. He was that sort of
it was kind of
pensioner,
farmer kind of
farmer from County Clare, wasn't he? Found beaten, unconscious, and
it was a sort of aggravated burglary. And then his own Gary Campion's own brother, Noel Campion, was shot dead as well. Look, I mean, but those kind of, I mean, and obviously the most recent case is the Imre Arakas case, which is again, you know, like you have to, like, I mean, again, he's a
serial killer. He gets paid, but he certainly takes pride in his work. Imre, he is. I'm first name terms now. Imre, he takes pride in his work.
He almost has a theatrical sense to him, doesn't he? When he does carrying, which would be, you know, not uncommon with the sort of traditional serial killers.
Yeah.
So again, you know, you have to ask the question: if these guys, if there was no gangland crime, would some of these guys gone on to committed murders anyway? And maybe they would have.
We have often asked that question in relation to
some of the figures up the north.
Yeah, like some of the people that were involved in the Troubles.
Well, say I mean, if you look at this, the Shankill butchers, you know, which those crimes were so savage and shocking. So, you know, I mean, they were serial killers. They really picked random people. It didn't matter if they were innocent or guilty. They were obviously associated with the Loyalist Power, the UVF, but they weren't, there was nothing that they did that could be considered political. So maybe those, if we have our serial killers are born in Ireland, they just attach themselves to something, some sort of gang, or in the north, one of the paramilitary organizations. You know, a lot of the gangland shootings, most of them probably are done by younger guys who are not getting paid a lot. And may, if you look at, say, some of the killings in the Flashy feud or in the Kulak feud, there was no big money changing hands.
Depends who you work for.
Well, it depends who you work for.
Because if you worked for the Kinahan cartel, you were paid on retainer a certain amount a month.
Yeah.
Plus you were paid for each kill.
Yes.
And weirdly, that created a more almost professional type of a hitman, and somebody who could afford to maybe, or were afforded rather, an easier go at family life than many of the others who are lurching from hit to hit, and probably, you know, you get caught trying to kill or killing somebody, life in prison.
Yeah.
You know, high risk, high stakes, high money.
And a lot of the killings, and I mean, they've really dropped out of existence, but in recent times, but a lot of them were done by guys who had their friends shot at, and they came back at them, and there was very little money changing hands, and the motive was, you know, the normal motive. But there's a few that stand out that I think they would have killed anyway, whether they'd been, no matter what the situation in gangland was around them.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of the Kinahans, here's one. This may be for me, but anyway, I'll read it out. Would you ever go to Dubai to see if you could catch a glimpse of Kinahan over there?
Well, would you?
No.
Would you not?
No. And I would, you know, I absolutely have no problem saying that. I would not feel safe working in Dubai trying to catch a glimpse, as you say. In other words, you know, was I trying to get up close and personal with the Kinahans? Absolutely wouldn't do that in Dubai. Number of reasons. Firstly, it is very difficult to work in Dubai. Photography, which isn't sort of given the nod by whoever you're trying to photograph, is illegal. A little bit like Monaco, where also the paparazzi were banned many years ago. I think probably after Lady Diana Spencer was killed in the car crash. I think they banned what they called the paps. But you can be arrested if you're caught. So obviously the point of trying to get up close and personal is to catch somebody of interest within the environment they're living in, to show the lifestyle they have. You can ask for an interview now, the likes of Daniel Kinahan, many different ways. You don't have to physically stand in front of them. I would not trust that I could work safely in Dubai. End of. I absolutely wouldn't. It's difficult to work out of Ireland anyway, okay, not the UK or certainly other countries, but when you don't quite have the same security net that you do. Now, I'm not talking doing a general job. I'm talking working undercover against sort of these very, very, global drug importers who have countless amount of people working for them, usually spotting for them. They're usually under threat themselves and they're feeling that way. So you have to be really careful how you work, even and probably especially undercover. In case they spot you, they might think that you're there to kill them. They might think you're police. You're probably in your best, state as being a little minnow of a journalist who's trying to catch something of their lives. But I did go to Spain to work on the Kinahan organization when they were, and numerous times have been to Spain to do work on them. Never felt 100% there, but took measures there to work as safely as possible. And you always had the backup of the fact that you were in Europe, and really, should anything happen, you should have been able to, or certainly felt able to call for a little bit of backup.
Yeah, the rule of law exists. In Dubai,
exactly.
Dubai does any law. The law, there is a legal system, but it's a system that's trumped by, political patronage. And the other reality is, the funny thing about Dubai is that it's avoided all of that violence despite having all of these major criminal figures there. But there was an interesting...
Violence on the streets.
That
doesn't mean you couldn't be lifted and put into...
No, you absolutely could.
Yeah.
And there was on one occasion an interesting... I think you spoke to Eamon about it in some of the statements given by Rafael Imperiale, where there's talk of, I think, or is it Ridwan Taji, talk of hiring ninjas to kill somebody. But they've really avoided committing that violence in Dubai. There was talk of somebody being stabbed to death because they didn't feel... They discussed it because they didn't feel comfortable bringing guns there. But one of the reasons that they don't have to do all that is because they have the system corrupted.
Yeah.
And therefore the system can work for them. People can be dealt with in other ways. So, yeah, it's I don't know if we're going to have to anyway go over there, because there's every chance he could be over here before we know it.
Well, exactly. And there's only so much you can do anyway as a journalist. You don't have that, you're not going in sanctioned
you're not
as a
you're not a
government
police
official.
officer.
You're not a police officer. You don't have the backing of a team that are armed or whatever else. There is only so much, and you have to have a bit of sense. Look, I think not just myself, but many crime journalists over the past few decades have kicked up a lot of information around the Kinahans, reported a lot, and other criminal groupings, and, you're working with limited and less resources all the time, and you're trying your best to try and report accurately, fairly, and with all the structures that are in place.
Yeah.
Sometimes that go in favour of the criminals. There's other questions, many of them here. Why can't we name Mr. Flashy? Why can't we name Mr. Big? We get that every time we do a Q&A. We can't because they are either before the courts on charges that have yet to go through the courts, and you can't do anything to disrupt a trial in front of a jury, or if it's still in the district or whatever, or also because they don't have a strong enough conviction for you to be able to name them.
Well, like in relation to that kind of, there's a question here. Has there been any update on the Jojo Dollard case? Last we heard there was a dig and an arrest. Do you have any update? So I suppose that highlights the legal system.
Yes.
Now, Jojo Dollard is one of those cases that people always remember. People always ask about it. She was one of the women. I suppose she's considered. The murder was considered as part of the sort of missing triangle murders, but they obviously and some of those murders were investigated to see if Larry Murphy could be linked to them.
Yeah.
Larry Murphy, I think, was considered in terms of Jojo Dollard, probably because some of his geographical movements. But I think in the long run, he was never considered a serious suspect. There was a suspect. There was an arrest in recent times. There was a dig at a property, and then I think there's people believe something is about to happen. And of course, that man was released without charge. I presume a file has gone to the DPP, but it goes quiet. And I suppose that's, people always ask about these cases.
Yeah.
But these cases are really, really, really tricky. We have many other cases. Some of them have been in the news very much recently about missing women. Elizabeth Stanley, for example, recently, and there can be people that are suspected. But what happens with these cases once the passage of time has gone? So these, I don't know when Jojo Dollard was, but 95. So you're talking 30 years effectively. Now, in that time, police techniques have changed massively. There may well, for example, there was no forensics anyway because obviously her body was never found. So that's an instant point at which it's very, very difficult to make progress on. If you don't have a body, you have to sort of prove a murder without having a remains. The CCTV just won't exist from back then. So people may be suspicious of people. There may be, if there's not an eyewitness, which there isn't an eyewitness in this case, there's people who have spotted her that day. She obviously made a phone call late at night. There's some of her movements are clear. Certainly the fact that she hitched a lift and where she was in town, all of those facts are known. But getting beyond that is really, really difficult. Now, what happens over the passage of time is, and I'm not specifically talking about this case, but sometimes people come forward, they may have known something at the time and they may say, John Smith or, John Doe or whatever, he did this and that and he told me this 10 years later. The police then will investigate that. But beyond getting a confession, it's really, really difficult. So there are a lot of... and some of these cases that generate the most attention are missing women. And in nearly every case, the police will be 90% sure who did it.
Yeah.
And they really believe it. The people in the local area might know the suspect and think it's not surprising to me that person is a suspect. But it's really, really difficult to progress those cases.
From an investigative point of view, but also from a journalistic point of view. And also just to say on the flip side of that, naming somebody that actually ultimately ended up not having anything to do with it is absolutely horrendous and very destructive of their lives. Yeah, of course. And what you get with these cases is they hold a constant fascination. But in terms of bringing something to court, it's really, really difficult. And the police can sometimes be criticised. And when you look back on some of the old cases, obviously cases like the Sophie Toscan de Plantier, you can see all sorts of policing that wasn't good. But there is a truth of it without a sort of either eyewitness, DNA, CCTV or confession. Yeah. They are really, really hard to bring to fruition. And the longer time goes on, the more difficult that gets. Now, that's not to say some of them aren't ultimately proven. And of course, Beast, the podcast, showed how that can happen. Absolutely, yeah, eventually. But that's more of a rarity. It's the coldest case, wasn't it? The coldest case, yeah. Now we finish on this for the moment, because there's a good few questions in about this, and we do need to talk about this, by the way. Any date for coming to Kilkenny? No, not at the moment. Any plans for doing another tour? Not a tour quite yet. Would like to be a date. Would like there to be a date in London. Not yet. We haven't worked that out. When are you touring again? Haven't worked that out. But, hi Nicola, I'm just messaging to see if you have any upcoming shows. We do. We're going to be at the Cork Podcast Festival on March the 30th, which is in the Cork Opera House. The tickets are available, I think, corkpodcastfestival.com or .ie, one of those. Anyway, you'll find that. But yeah, we're doing a one-off show in Cork at the end of March, okay? Now, you'll be glad to know that myself and Ian have been working hard on this, okay? And we have come up with a cunning plan.
Yeah.
Because what we're actually going to do is a show on talking to criminals, because I think that's what people find really interesting, isn't it? It's that sort of behind the scenes stuff. How did you get to talk to them in the first place?
Yeah.
What were they really like?
Yeah.
You know, and all the various crazy, mad, strange situations we have found ourselves in over the years with various people. You know, it's been so interesting the way things have changed, you know, since we both started off as journalists, when everything seemed so simple. Now, when you look back, you either really spoke to somebody on the phone or you met with them. Nowadays, there's all different methods for people to communicate with you. There's encryption. Many people are communicating with you for a long time anonymously before you kind of realize who they are. And people have all sorts of motivations, don't they?
They do. And look, the world has changed. That you know, and then the criminals are doing their own podcast.
But they're starting to talk.
They are
very much starting to talk.
I mean,
they're talking to one another. They're becoming podcasters. They're talking to us.
Yeah. And yeah, look, it's. I mean, social media has changed the world, but it's also changed journalism, and even more, it's changed crime journalism. It's also, I mean, I remember as well, if you look back in the day, do you remember you used to get these really, really blurry CCTV images, and it'd be straight away, that's front page, and you couldn't really see anything.
Yeah.
Of course, the world has changed now. Everything is effectively, if something happens in Dublin, you know, within an hour, you're going to get videos of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, you don't, you know, where that was like gold dust. But I think as well that people people involved in criminality know that they can bypass some of the media and put it out. And I also think there has been a bit of a cultural change. We talk about omerta about not speaking to the police. But I think there has been a slight change in that it's not it used to be really looked down on for people.
Do you know why I'm laughing?
Because you're looking at how close the gig is. And
well, no, I'm not actually looking at, well, it is bloody hell, it's close. I was actually looking at the fact that I don't have it in my diary.
Yeah. Well.
You could be there on your own.
No.
You could be sitting there on your own, talking to yourself.
No,
because I would just go, I forgot about it.
Yeah. Well, let's.
Yeah?
I thought you were trying to sell tickets.
I haven't forgot about it at all. I've been working really, really hard.
No, we are. Look, it's the shows are great, aren't they?
The shows are great. They're great fun, and it's great to meet people. So that's the Cork Podcast Festival, March 30th. We're at the Opera House.
Yeah.
And 8:00. I actually went on there to see what night that was.
Sunday night.
It's a Sunday. Oh, that's a nice night to go out, actually.
It is, yeah.
So there you go. That's our shows.
I'll definitely be there. Nicola might be.
I'll just have to see if I can fit it into my diary. Will I?
Well, what do you do? You're not doing Dancing with the Stars or anything like that, no?
What I have to put up with here, honestly.
You know what? Actually, I did get a question. They said Nicola's a lot more flirty with you than she is with Eamon.
Who said that? Eamon who?
No, not Eamon Dillon.
Eamon Dillon?
No, she said. No, the person sent me a question. She said. Nicola's a lot more flirty with you than she is with Eamon Dillon.
I thought you were talking about
I said I don't blame her.
Because of course he thinks he is such hot stuff, don't you?
I suppose so.
You do, don't you?
Oh, well. My mother agrees, as I've said before.
Now listen, that's us done for the moment. If you have any more questions, keep them coming. Send them in to our email address, crimeworld@sundayworld.com. And we'll get around to doing some more Q&As over the next few weeks.
We will.
All right. Thanks, Niall.
Thank you, Nicola. Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.